What's good, everybody? It's your boy, rather grown man, Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4, the legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal, Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. And no more ado for me or for you, we're continuing the Donald Goines classic, Cry Revenge, as he writes as Al C. Clarke. I know, you see the Mets hat. Don't fray and don't fret. At least, I'm not putting a solo or nothing, but we're New York, you know what I mean? This is New York, it's all NY, NYC, both stadiums are in NYC. That's it. I never really understood the rivalry, but yo, what up? It's still a New York team, right? Easy now. Anyway, back to this. To the folks who keep this channel alive with their contributions. Danielle Cunningham, welcome back. J Knox, SG, CEO. T Money, Alasia Ross, K-Town, 704 Liquor House Talk Network. Sweet D, I've been a healer. Maria da Silva, Cynthia, Chadwick Rucker, Monster, Lost Roads, Keith Woods, Sees All the Time, Trey Noel, Jamie Pearson, Just Being Kiki, Taweedy, Sherelle 5150, Tequila Green, CJ, Mr. Light, J Bobo, Goose Jack, Deswan Manuel, The Fourth, Pretty Ricky, Lady Rain 808, Dario Carrington, Desmond Thomas, Marcus Valentine, Kyla Easler, and the Great Easler Family, BLE 007, Michael Woodford, Pat Master OST, Anthony Leach, Calm, Nana James Tama, Mr. Fulltime, Brian Latham, Mr. T, Jah Logic and Friends, the Ranters Union, and finally, Demon Wolf 570. All right then, y'all. Let's go right where we need to go. Happy New Year, everybody. And I hope your 2025 is just as fruitful and hopeful as you hope for it to be, just like me. All right, then, moving right along. Chapter 8. It was a beautiful day. The morning music of the singing birds came through the open window, and one could smell the warmth and brightness of the day in the air. Curtis rolled over and tried to cover his head with a sheet, but the sunshine still came through. It wasn't really the hot sunshine that he was trying to hide from. He just didn't want to face the day. That's ridiculous. The past night's work was too much for him. It was all too stark raving clear in his mind. He could still feel the blood of the dead man on his hands, even though he had almost rubbed the skin off trying to wash the blood when he had come home that morning. My apologies, folks. Honey? Honey? Shirley's voice drifted to him from the kitchen. Would you like a large breakfast this morning, or just some black coffee? Coffee, dear. Coffee, dear. Curtis called back, then kicked the sheets off and climbed out of his bed. Curtis raised his arms and stretched. He could smell the morning's fresh air, yet He took no enjoyment in it. What he had tried not to think about came rushing back to him. Please give me a second. I cannot record while that noise is outside. I know, folks, some of y'all might not hear it, but you see, the problem is, y'all hear it live, y'all might not hear as much. But when I'm trying to record it into this here, this microphone picks up everything outside. Everything. And I gotta go in, I gotta edit that out because I want to provide a paramount recording for you all when y'all listen to this on the playback. I can't have these sounds going off as they do. I mean, listen to that. Not the kind of place you want to do podcasting in. I trust you on that one. That's ridiculous. Give me a second, y'all. Let's see what the hell's going on out there. Oh. Well, that makes sense. Of all times, they decided to come now to pick up the garbage. People cannot make up their minds for shizzle, my nizzle. Pardon the delay. I'm waiting until that truck gets the hell out of here. This is ridiculous. Coffee, dear, Curtis called back, then kicked the sheets off and climbed out of his bed. Curtis raised his arms and stretched. He could smell the morning's fresh air, yet he took no enjoyment in it. What he had tried not to think about came back rushing to him. What he had tried not to think about came rushing back to him. After slipping on a robe, Curtis went into the kitchen. Honey, he began, what do you want today? I'm going over to Mom's pad in a little while, so if you want to, you can gather up the kids when they come home for lunch and take them along. Before answering, Shirley set a cup of coffee in front of him. Kurt, I got all that washing to do, baby, so I better stay home and get it finished. Maybe later on this afternoon when you get back, I'll be finished and we could ride out to a park or something. Neither one wanted to bring up the killings. They talked about the subject. Finally, Shirley sat down at the kitchen table beside Curtis. It ain't no use blaming yourself for what happened, Kurt. Dan is just a no-good bastard, that's all. Yeah, I know. It's easy to tell yourself that, but people think me and Dan are closer than what we really are. Curtis said softly as he slowly sipped his steaming coffee. Shit, she exclaimed. You're not responsible for what another nigger does, Daddy. So don't worry yourself over it. They were suddenly interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. Shirley got up quickly. And went to the door. She didn't bother opening it. Just glanced through the peephole. "Ain't nothing happening there," Kurt heard her say. Then she added, "Ain't nothing happening there," Kurt heard her say. Then she added, "I don't know, I don't know how long it's gonna be. Maybe a day or sometime tomorrow. But it ain't gonna be no time soon, so don't come back in the next couple of hours." She returned to the kitchen, shaking her head. "At times, I feel sorry for them addicts. Then another time, I don't give a shit what happens to them. I know one thing, Kurt. They will worry the fucking shit out of a person about that goddamn dope." Curtis nodded his head. Excuse me, y'all. Curtis nodded his head in agreement. "Yeah, honey. I know they get on your nerves, but try not to be too mean to them when you speak. I mean, we do live quite good off them, so we have to put up with them, at least, until we get where we don't have to deal in such small packages. Then the money will be bigger and everything." "I ain't worried about the money, Kurt. We're getting more money now than I've ever believed possible. It's just that dope fiends are so goddamn dangerous. Look at the shit Dan pulled off. You never know what's going to happen when you deal with those kind of people, that's all." Curtis looked at her. "Honey, if you feel that way about it, maybe I could set up something different than what we are going through right now." "Like what, Kurt? Like what, Kurt?" she asked curiously. "I really don't know offhand, Shirley. But if I could find some guy I could trust, I'd put a bag in his hands, or better yet, I'd rent a place for him to live and sell the jive out of." "It sounds good, Kurt, but can you find somebody you could put that much faith in?" He tossed his hands in the air. "Ain't no sense of worrying about all that mess right now, Shirley, because I don't even know when I'll be able to cop again. After that shit last night, Fat-ass George is frightened to death. Fat-ass George is frightened to death of niggas." "Well, maybe it's all for the best. We got a small start, Kurt. If you got a job for a few weeks with the check I get, it will be enough for us to get along. On," Shirley stated. Curtis got up from the table. "Let's not start on that shit, girl. The job is for Elaine, and I don't want no part of it." Shirley whirled around and slammed some dishes down the sink. She didn't bother to answer him again, but she showed her disapproval by her actions. Curtis ignored her and went back into the bedroom. As he dressed, he thought about what she had said and laughed. He was used to making $200, maybe $300 a day now, and to go back to a job would be like giving up. He liked the recognition that went along with getting big money, as well as the money itself. The telephone rang sharply in the front room. Curtis listened with one ear as his woman answered it. "Kurt, it's for you," Shirley called out. He picked up the phone in the bedroom. "Hey, what is it?" he inquired as he reached for a smoke. "What? What?" he yelled. "What?" he yelled suddenly, forgetting about the cigarette he was reaching for. He held the phone close and listened quietly. Then he asked one question. "Which hospital was he in?" Shirley came into the bedroom and watched Curtis as he held the telephone close to his ear. He hung up slowly, a vacant look in his eyes. "What's the matter?" she asked, sensing something was wrong, even though she didn't know what it could be. It's my brother, he began. Some Mexicans caught him coming home from the gym and jumped on him. I ain't got the full truth about it, but it seems as if they thought he knew where Dan was hiding out. How fucking stupid can a goddamn person be? How fucking stupid can a goddamn person be? Curtis cursed angrily. How the fuck would Billy know any fucking thing about Dan? You want me to go to the hospital with you? She asked after a moment of silence. Nah, baby. That won't be necessary. You stay here and take care of the kids. As soon as I hear something, I'll call and let you know. Shirley followed him to the door and held it open as he went out. Okay, honey, she said as she stood in the doorway. Don't forget to call either way. I want to know what's wrong with Billy as bad as you do. Curtis ran down the stairway and he reached the front door of the modern apartment house. He almost collided with an elderly man who lived in one of the downstairs apartments. Curtis continued to run after sidestepping the old man until he reached the car. He started it up and drove swiftly away. When Curtis reached the hospital, he didn't waste any time searching for a place to park. He just pulled up beside a red line painted on the curb and parked. The Martin Luther King Hospital was used mostly by the poor blacks and Mexicans in the nearby communities. As soon as Curtis reached for the inpatient waiting room, he began to look for his mother and sister. The hospital waiting room was full of Negroes waiting for friends and relatives. As Curtis made his way up to the desk, he could smell the odor that only a hospital carried. The round-faced black nurse behind the desk glanced up at Curtis with a bored expression on her face. Yes? She inquired in a high, thin voice that he would have never guessed came from a woman with so much bulk. I'm here to see about my brother who was brought in earlier. His name is Billy Carson. I think he was. Before he could finish, she interrupted him. Oh, yeah. You're talking about the young man who was attacked near the high school. Her face became serious, and there was a compassion in the look she gave him. He's not hurt seriously, is he? Curtis asked sharply, shaken by the woman's open concern. I'm afraid he's still in intensive care, but you can go to room 104 and find out more. I think your mother is already back there, young man, she said as he turned to leave. Curtis walked down the long hallway until he saw a sign with the room numbers. He turned right and began passing patients lying on stretchers. A group of people were sitting next to a doorway as he passed. He saw that it was the X-ray room. The people sitting on the benches outside the X-ray room watched a tall, well-dressed black man as he went past. There was something about his bearing that made people look at him a second time. It was not because he was slim and supple, all bone and muscle and sinew. What caught their attention was the brutal leanness about his face. He looked like a hawk hunting its prey. As soon as he made another right turn, closely following the directions, He saw his mother staring. He saw his mother staring wildly up and down the hallway. Tears were streaming down her dark cheeks. His sister stood helplessly by. "Mama," he heard his sister say as he walked up, "it's going to be all right. It could be worse." Rita looked over her mother's shoulder and saw her brother coming towards them. A look of relief flashed across her features when she saw him. "Mama, here's Curtis now," she said, hoping to give her mother some relief, but the words had the opposite effect. Mrs. Carson whirled around on her older son with fury blazing from her eyes. "There you are! I don't know why you bothered to come down here. Maybe it's just to see what kind of handiwork your gangster friends did to your brother. You ought to be ashamed to even show your face down here. Her voice was loud and hysterical, her emotions getting the best of her. Curtis was taken by surprise at the anger of his mother. He felt it was uncalled for. He hadn't done a thing to deserve it. Her words continued to beat at him, even though Rita tried desperately to shut her up. "It's all your fault. It wasn't Billy they wanted, it was you. But since they couldn't find you, they took their anger out on him. Now he's laying in there, unable to move because of you." The words, "unable to move," shook him more than her senseless anger. "He ain't paralyzed?" Curtis asked, bewilderment and shock in his voice. Rita shook her head. I didn't tell you on the telephone because the doctors hadn't finished checking him out yet. But the men who jumped on him also shot him while he was laying on the ground. One of the dirty bastards shot Billy in the back." Tears began to flow down her cheeks. "Oh my God," Curtis thought angrily. It was all becoming like a nightmare. Why? The words kept flashing through his mind. It couldn't be because of him. Curtis thought back and knew he hadn't done anything to any Mexicans to make them want to take their anger out on him. So why was Billy attacked? Why? He didn't ask the question to anybody in particular. The word just came out. "Why? His mother screamed in his face. "Because of that no-good son of a bitch that you had over the house a few weeks ago. The bastard ate at my table. Now this had happened to my boy." Dan. The name came and went into Curtis's frantic thoughts. "You mean because of that nigga Dan?" He looked at Rita. Rita nodded her head. "Billy said they thought he knew where Dan was hiding out, but when he couldn't tell them where Dan was, they jumped on him." Billy said they thought he knew where Dan was hiding out. When he couldn't tell them where Dan was, they jumped on him. Curtis heard what she said, but he didn't want to believe her. Could it be possible for somebody to be that foolish? To be that foolish? To make him responsible for what somebody else had done? It was possible. The more he thought about it, the more he was sure that Pedro and his wild bunch of hoodlums were responsible for this. It would be like the foolish young Mexican to do something stupid, make somebody else pay for something that they didn't have anything to do with. "Mama," he began. "Just shut your mouth, boy. I don't want to hear no excuses now. Your brother is laying in there, ruined for life because of you. So why don't you just go on back to wherever you came from? We don't need you here, Curtis. Just go on. She never considered the pain she was causing her older boy. Her words beat at him like falling bricks. As he listened to her, a feeling of terrible shame overcame him. Mama, why don't you stop that? Rita said, her anger growing. She didn't hold Curtis responsible and hated to hear her mother talk to him like that. Happy holidays, man, says Dre Smooth. Salute to you, brother. Thank you for stopping by. Happy New Year, friend. Hated to hear her mother talk to him like that. Curtis's eyes were filled with pain. As he stared at his mother, a feeling of great depression overcame him. He couldn't do anything about what had happened. It was over and done with. But he could make the people responsible for it pay. And he meant to make them pay dearly. At first, he had felt pity for the Fernandez family. But now, there was no pity in his heart. His mother's words beat out any pity that he might have had for anyone. Now, there was only the thought of revenge. Not only on the Mexicans, but on Dan, who had caused all of it to happen in the first place. Rita, Curtis began, I'm going to take off. It ain't nothing I could do around here. With Mama feeling the way she does, there ain't no reason for me to hang out here. But I'm going to take care of the matter. The people who caused this are going to fucking pay. And don't think for a goddamn minute that they ain't. I just want you to know that I ain't done nothing to nobody to make them do this thing to Billy. I know, she answered quickly. But you take care of yourself, Kurt. Mama's just upset right now. After she gets used to it, she'll realize that it wasn't because of you that it happened. I'm just sorry that she carried on the way she did, that's all. Rita spoke truthfully, trying to remove some of the pain she saw in his face. Her mother had been very unjust as far as she was concerned. But when it came to mothers, you couldn't tell them anything. You just had to go along with them, even though a lot of the times they were wrong. Call me at my house when you leave, okay, Rita? Curtis asked as he started to go. She nodded okay, then watched him as he turned on his heels and left. There would be help to pay somewhere in the city, she knew, because Curtis wasn't the kind of man who took abuse lightly. Pause for the cause. Pause for the cause. All right, man. Whew. Blow a little air on me real quick. Thank you all for stopping by. See an old man work his gimmick. The United Ronin Networks is what it is. Please tune into Bounce. That's my podcast on all major platforms. I mean, you're not going to find it on iHeartMedia, but you'll find it on just about everything else on YouTube. It's his own YouTube channel. Go ahead and subscribe today. That's The Art of Bounce, or the podcast formerly known as The Art of Bounce. It's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, it's wherever you want it to be, except, some joints. It's on PodSurf FM, though. Please follow the podcast at ForceFed Digital over there. All right, then. Just give me a second, cool off just a bit. take a couple more drags off this joint here. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna read a couple more chapters. Alright, let's go, bro. Chapter 9. What the hell did you say you did, Emilio Fernandez? What the hell did you say you did? Emilio Fernandez yelled at his younger brother. I said we caught that spade Billy coming from school and kicked the shit out of him. Why? Emilio asked, sighing and sitting back down on their aging couch. His mother and sister had left earlier to go to the funeral home nearby to leave a proper suit for Reuben. Why? Why? Pedro repeated. We want the coon to tell us where that punk Dan was hanging out. That's why. Brother, just stop for a minute and think. Billy don't even run around with his brother Curtis. So why pick on him? He wouldn't know where Dan was hanging out because they are two different kinds of studs. Even you, Pedro, should be able to realize that. All these spade dudes know about each other, Emilio. You just like to hang around them too much because you shooting that fucking shit now. Pedro eyed his brother angrily. Bullshit, Pedro. And you know that's all it is. You just wanted to kick the shit out of somebody, and he happened to come along. I guess you figured it all out, because when you have trouble with Curtis, don't come running home telling me all about it. I don't give a flying fuck about no Curtis, man. To me, he ain't nothing but another burrhead. Pedro replied arrogantly. As Emilio stared at his brother, he had to shake his head. He had to shake his head in wonder because he knew Pedro meant what he said. Here he had gone out of his way and angered one of the meanest studs in the city, and Pedro didn't give a shit about it. As he stared at his brother, he had second thoughts because behind the dark eyes that stared out at him, he could see the hint of fear. His brother was just putting on a big front while shaking his pants. Okay, Pedro, he said. It's your problem. I got my own troubles to worry about. It's too much trouble trying to live without going out of my way getting in some silly-ass gang fight. You and that fucking bunch of Chicanos that you run around with are going to bite off more than you can handle one of these fucking days. Pedro laughed harshly. I'm not about to lose no sleep on account of no nigga, Emilio, even if you do. Pedro stood up and began to pace. You ain't shitting me. Emilio replied. I know damn well you're worried, and you should be. Curtis won't take this lightly, but maybe if you guys didn't hurt his brother too bad, we might be able to get Fat George to hush it up. For a few seconds, Pedro didn't bother to answer. Then he stopped his pacing. Listen, man, he was hurt bad. That dumbass Vic Mojica shot him in the back while he was on the ground. What? Emilio roared, jumping up from the couch and snatching his brother's arm. You mean Billy was shot too? Emilio couldn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. Just hold on, Emilio. I tried. I honestly tried to stop it, but it got out of hand. You know how these things, you know how these things are in the, you know how these things are in the street, Rumble? Street rumble my ass, Emilio growled. What kind of street rumble is it when 6 or 7 guys kick the shit out of one kid? Street rumble my ass! Bullshit! Emilio started to pace, then snapped his fingers. Jesus Christ, we let Mamma Mia and Maria go to the fucking funeral home without no protection. God damn it, he yelled as he ran toward the front door. Pedro followed closely behind his brother. Hey, Emilio, don't you think you're carrying this thing a little too far? This stud won't do nothing to our mother. Emilio whirled on him. You fucking stupid bastard. If you fucked his brother up for nothing, do you think he gives a shit about a mother or sister? All he wants is black vengeance, and that means he'll strike at whoever the fuck he can. As the two men hurried down the sidewalk, their mother and sister were getting ready to leave the funeral home. Curtis sat across the street from the old Spanish mortuary. If he had figured it right, some members of the Fernandez family will have to show up sometime today. He glanced in his mirror as a car turned down the lonely street and drove slowly past. Curtis wiped the sweat from his brow. His only worry was the license tags he had removed from another car and put on top of his. He fingered the sawed-off shotgun, then leaned it against the windowsill. His face had taken on the cruel snarl that belonged to the past, on some jungle hunter. There was no mercy at all in his expression. As he sat waiting, he could still hear the words of his mother beating at him. It was a shame that things had to turn out this way, but he couldn't let the Mexicans get away with it. If they did, there was no telling who they might attack next. His best bet was to knock off the remaining 2 brothers. That way, he wouldn't have any more trouble out of the Fernandez family, because there wouldn't be any of the males left to worry about. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he saw the funeral parlor door open and 2 women come out. As he looked closely, he saw that it was an old woman and a girl. As they drew near, he recognized Maria, the younger sister in the Fernandez family. That must be the mother with her, he reflected, hesitating briefly. He didn't want to make war on the women, but he wanted to strike back so that they would be as hurt as he was. He sighed as the women drew near. Then he slowly raised the sawed-off shotgun and held it on the window frame. As the 2 women came abreast of the car, he pointed the gun directly at the young girl, then pulled both triggers. The roar of the gun almost deafened him, but he still managed to get the car in gear and pull away from the curb. Young Maria took the full blast of both barrels. The shotgun knocked her into her mother with such force that she pushed her mother off her feet. The buckshot ripped open the young girl's side all the way up to her armpits. Blood Blood splattered the older woman, who still hadn't figured out what had happened. She managed to push her daughter off of her and climbed slowly to her feet, then leaned down and shook her daughter. At the sight of the blood, she let out a scream that was far louder than the noise the shotgun blast had made. People came running from all directions to help, and in the crowd were her two sons. Emilio took his mother in his arms. He held her tightly, staring down over her back at the body of his baby sister. Tears of rage filled his eyes as he glanced up at his brother, who was looking at the carnage, dumbfounded. All Pedro could do was shake his head. I never figured it would get out of hand like this, he murmured to himself. Unaware that he was actually talking out loud. You son of a bitch, Emilio cursed, clutching his weeping mother in his arms. Now, goddamn it, he cursed at the sky. I'm goddamn sure of it. Pedro was so shocked by what he saw, he could only bend over his sister's body and cry. It's not my fault, he cried over and over again, until somebody took him by the arm and led him away. He never knew who it was that led him to the funeral home and sat him down in a chair. He couldn't see because of the tears that ran so freely down his cheeks. Curtis drove 6 blocks before stopping and removing the license plates from his car. He then drove to an empty alley and broke the shotgun down. He left a piece of it in a burning garbage can, then drove farther and tossed another piece away. Each time he made sure the piece he tossed away was cleanly wiped. The killing of the young girl didn't bother him, though. He was numb from the pain of the early morning incidents. Before arriving home, he stopped and called, giving Shirley plenty of warning not to allow anybody inside the apartment until after he got there. She listened quietly to his orders, then hung up. Curtis climbed back into his car and drove slowly home. His whole world seemed to have changed in less than 24 hours. It was hard to figure, but he knew now that nothing would ever be the same. He also realized that he had another job to do. There was no way he was going to allow Dan to get away with the shit he had started. Somebody had to make him pay for it, and Curtis felt in the mood to be the one to do it. The thought flashed through his mind as he drove aimlessly for a minute that he would have to purchase another gun. The thought flashed through his mind as he drove aimlessly for a minute that he would have to purchase another gun. It would have to be a gun that couldn't be traced back to him. He gave the thoughts free rein as soon as he knew where to go to find the kind of weapon he needed. He pressed down on the gas. But first things first, he wanted to make sure Dan was where he thought he might be. Then he would get the gun. It wouldn't take long. Dan wasn't that hard a man to find, especially especially when he was so determined. All right, we'll take a pause for the cause, just because. Wild Donkey's in the house. Salute to you. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year to you too, 704 Liquor House Talk Network. And of course, Dre Smooth. Stay in the building. I love you all like cooked food. All right? For real. Now, with that being said, let me take a couple minutes, regain myself. Donald Goines is the book. Cry Revenge is the name of the novel. Donald Goines is the author, should I say. And yeah, this book is more than halfway done. I shall read chapter 10. And I think I'm going to read chapter 12 as well. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'll read chapter 11 too, because it's pretty short. Let me see. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'll do it. Just give me a second, though. And folks, don't forget, please listen to Bounce, the podcast formerly known as Bounce. It's available now on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, and YouTube as well. You can go subscribe over there. Tell a friend to tell a friend. You know, any little bit helps. Tune in to the podcast formerly known as Bounce Today. All right. Delicious. Weed is one of the best things ever known to man. Leave it to one idiot to make it illegal to put money in his pocket. Just in case you didn't know. 1937. Look it up. All right, then. Let me put this away. Considering the hundreds and hundreds of years that cannabis was available, readily available, and, to be honest, legal, until one dickhead made it uncool. Reefer madness and all of this bullshit. Anyways, let's continue. Chapter 10. It was still too light outside, Dan thought, as he stared moodily out of the vacant house window. Even though Dan hadn't occupied the empty yellow house long, there was plenty of evidence that revealed someone had taken up temporary shelter in the deserted home. The floor of the once clean and well-kept home was now littered with debris that Dan had scattered about. Empty pop bottles and cigarette packs were everywhere. God damn, he murmured to himself as he stared out the window, unable to make up his mind on what to do. One thing was for sure, he moaned, as another stomach cramp hit him. It was past time for him to fix. If he didn't want to become a real sick junkie, he would have to get out of the deserted house. He would have to get out of the deserted house and find some junk. But from who? The question came back for him the 1,000th time. The question came back to him for the 1,000th time. Who in the fuck could he turn to? It was impossible for him to just walk up. It was impossible for him to just walk up on a set and cop. There would be 100 police up there minutes after he arrived. No, he would have to come up with something a hell of a lot better than that. Dan reached for another cigarette, only to find the pack was completely empty. Only to find the pack was completely empty. He tossed it on the floor, cursing under his breath. Dan began to pace. He was like some wild animal. He was like some wild animal that had been caged too long. He thought of Curtis, but rejected the idea as soon as he had it. Curtis wouldn't do a damn thing to help. The only thing he could depend on was that Curtis wouldn't turn him over to any fucking police. Dope, 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 dope. That was the all-important thing right now. Nothing else meant a goddamn thing. He had to find some drugs, and it would have to be done soon. This time, when Dan started for the rear door, he didn't hesitate. He glanced out of the boarded up window before slowly pushing open the back door. The late afternoon breeze felt good on his face as he walked quickly through the rear yard. As he jumped the fence, he saw three young Negro kids playing in the alley. "See, I told you," one called out to his buddy. "Told me what?" his friend asked quickly. "I told you somebody was living in that old house, remember?" The other colored child shook his head. "That don't prove nothing, 'cause he jumped the fence. He might just be cutting through the yard." "Hey, mister!" The young kid yelled as he ran after Dan, trying to prove his point. "Don't you live back there?" Dan glared angrily over his shoulder. "Ain't your mama taught you to mind your own goddamn business, little nigger?" Dan cursed and continued to walk swiftly down the alley. The other boy laughed at his friend's predicament. As he ran up. "You ain't proved nothing," he sang as he reached them. "You young punks better go and find you somewhere else to play," Dan warned them sharply as he glared at them out of his swollen red eyes. Neither child was a fool. First of all, they knew Dan was a young man, and that meant that he could outrun neither one of them. That one fact was more than enough for them. They both turned on their heels and went back the way they had come, every now and then looking back to see where the tall, dark man was. The project heat is deep. The second time they turned around, Dan had disappeared. They realized at once that the man had taken a shortcut through one of the backyards farther down the alley. Once out on the street again, away from the alluring feeling of security the alleys gave him. Dan became overly cautious. He took his time before venturing out from the sidewalks and crossing the narrow streets. He wandered aimlessly at first, hoping that he might just run across some addicts who didn't know him that well. He knew that he was only fooling himself, because even if he ran into that unlikely addict, the junkie would know from the grapevine that Dan was running. As he neared 15th Street, he still hadn't made up his mind on which direction to take. He stopped in the middle of the block and just stood there with his hands on his hips. He was the picture of rejection at that moment. Here he was, he reflected, with a damn pocket full of money and nowhere to spend it. The sight of a small neighborhood grocery store caught his searching eyes. He quickly crossed a deserted street and entered the store. Dan glanced around, then picked up a cold bottle of orange pop. He stayed in the store and drank the pop slowly as the aging male storekeeper watched him closely. Before leaving, Dan bought a small cake. He didn't really want anything to eat at the moment, but he decided to force himself to eat something. There was no way of knowing when he might get the chance to eat again. This goddamn running shit, he decided, was for the birds. Once again, the idea came to him that his best bet would be to leave town. Yet, even if he caught the bus out of town, he would still have to find some dope before he left. There was no way possible for him to even think about leaving unless he had an ample supply of drugs. He took a quick look at the street before venturing back out again, anxiously rejecting one addict's name after another until he couldn't think of anyone else who used. He started quickly going back over the names in his mind again, with the realization that there was no one he could actually trust finally making itself completely understood, he began to seethe with anger. Not at himself for being the sole blame, but at others for being so dishonest a man couldn't put any faith in them. Well, old buddy, he said to himself as he made up his mind on what to do. If the mountain won't come to Muhammad, old Mo here will just have to go to the motherfucking mountain. As he walked, he talked to himself more to build up his own courage than for any other reason. After finally making up his mind on what he was going to do, it didn't take Dan long enough. It didn't take Dan long to reach his destination. When he reached 10th Street, he turned down the alley. The house he sought was in the middle of the block. At first, he didn't recognize the backyard that he was trying to find, but the broken down fence at the rear of the house was the one he was looking for. Dan moved slowly to the rear of the house. It would have appeared to an observer that Dan was expecting an attack rather than approaching the house whose occupants rarely bothered themselves enough to care about someone else's problems. The mother of the home had a drinking problem as well as the father, while the son, whom Dan was seeking, had a drug problem. Dan ducked under an old clothesline and knocked softly on the rear window. After waiting a second, he knocked again. This time, he hadn't long to wait. Before he heard some noise from within. Suddenly, the ragged window shade flew up and the light, pimple-faced black man stared out at him. Dan watched the man's face closely. Instantly, it began to change. At first, the man didn't seem to know who it was, but when he recognized Dan, he changed. First, his light brown skin took on a dark shade that could only come from the blood rushing from his heart. Next, but just as transparent, was the hugeness of his eyes. They appeared ready to jump out of his head. "Hey, baby boy," Dan said in the more cheerful voice than he felt. "You look as you done went and seen you a ghost." For a while, all the man could do was stand and stare open-mouthed. "God damn, Dan," he said finally. Before he could say anything else, Dan cut him off. "Listen, Milton, I want you to do something for me, man." This time, it was Milton who did the cutting off. "Dan," he began, raising his hands up in a show of hopelessness. "Man, you're so goddamn hot, a man could fry an egg on your shadow, brother. I mean, just for letting certain people know where they could reach you would be worth at least a bill, man." "Is that all?" Dan said coldly. "Shit, for a motherfucker taking the risk of putting the finger on me, it's worth his motherfucking life. So add that shit up and tell me it's a funky $100 worth of cocksucker's life." Milton shook his head quickly, fear showing in fear showing in every pore of his body. A person standing next to him could actually smell it coming out of the little man. "Aw, brother," his voice had changed into a high whine. "I was just telling you what's being said, Dan. That's all, man. Somebody ought to pull your coat to what's going down, if by chance you don't already know." "Nah, Milton, I'm up on it. But as you can see, ain't nothing happened yet. Because the people who was going across me ain't able to cross anybody else now. Ain't ever, ain't able to ever cross any, ain't able to ever cross anybody else now." Milton just stood and stared at him like a frightened rabbit. "Man," he managed to say. Seeing that the man was truly frightened, Dan decided that the time was right for him to make his offer. "Dig, Milton, you look as if you need a fix." Dan waited until Milton nodded his head in agreement before continuing. "Okay, now money ain't no problem, Milton, but I'm having trouble copping, as you probably already know." Again, Milton nodded his head in agreement. He couldn't think of a pusher who would be foolish enough to do any kind of business with Dan. But he didn't waste any words stating this fact. As he managed to get his nerves under control, Milton glanced at Dan's face. For the first time and quickly realized that the tall, dark man was sick. Up until then, it hadn't even occurred to him. It hadn't even occurred to him to wonder why Dan would pop up in his backyard when half the city was out looking for him. It had been too much like a bad dream. Dan spelled trouble. Anybody found with him would more than likely catch the same kind of hell Dan was going to catch whenever the right people ran down on him. "Man, I ain't got no stuff, Dad," Milton mumbled, then added, "I mean, you know if I had anything, I'd set it out for you. But I ain't fixed since this morning." Dan waved his excuses away. He knew that if the man had a kilo inside under the bed, he wouldn't give any of it away. He was a petty nigga, and always would be. "Listen, Milt, I didn't come over here to beg, boy. I come to get you to go and cop for me." Dan waited, trying to read the frightened man's mind. When Milton didn't comment right off, Dan asked, "Did you hear what I said, boy? Did you hear what I said, boy? I want you to go cop for me. Milton had heard all right. He just hadn't finished going over the alternatives that it left. If someone should get hip to the fact that he copped for Dan, his ass would be in a sling. But on the other hand, he wanted to blow, and if he didn't go and cop for Dan, he didn't have the slightest idea of where he would be able to raise the money to get a fix. "It's taking you a long time to make up your mind about something that simple, Milt. Now, if by chance you're going over the idea of burning me or some other self-destroying thoughts like that, you'd be better off if you went inside and wiped out your mammy or pa. Because that's just what the hell I'd do if I even thought you were going to do something that might cause me trouble." "Nah, Dan," Milton said hurriedly. "I was just trying to figure out who has some good jive. Since Kurt's brother got hurt, he ain't got no stuff. Well, I was thinking about spending at least $100. That's it. But if you knew where some real good job was..." But Dan warned, his voice dropping down into a cruel growl, "I don't want no motherfucking punk. and I ain't accepting none neither. Nah, Dan, if I go cop, you ain't got to worry about no bunk, man. I've been around too long. Nigga gotta be out of his mind to even think about selling me some bunk. Dan kept his eyes on the young man's face. He knew what Milton said was true. Milton had mud on his name, so people were leery of taking his money unless they had some good dope to sell him. Unless they had some good dope. Unless they had some good dope to sell to him. There were rumors out about Milton having dropped dimes on pushers who put shit on him. If a pusher took his money and sold him some bullshit, when Milton came back and demanded his money, they set it out or closed up shop, because if his money wasn't returned, you could expect a visit from the police sometime soon. Dan tried not to show his urgency, but it wasn't possible for him to hide it. It was in his voice when he spoke. You think you might be able to cop some decent skag, man? Milton knew he had a fish on the line, yet at the same time, he understood the dangers of handling what he had hooked. Yeah, Dan, it ain't no problem with me copping, but where you gonna be at when I come back? But where you gonna be when I come back? But where you gonna be when I come back? The question didn't take Dan by surprise, but it did cause shivers of fear to run up and down his spine. Don't worry about where I'm gonna be. Don't worry about where I'm gonna be. You just don't take too long going to cop. I'll be somewhere watching wherever you get back. Just don't stay gone over an hour. Milton sighed. There was nothing he could do but cop, then hit the package before leaving the dope house and take whatever Dan gave him when he got back. That should be enough to hold him until tomorrow anyway. Be happy to get that much out of the deal. Listen, Dan added, it's $25 extra in this for you, Milton, so hurry on up. If you take care right, who knows? There will be other times. As Dan spoke, Milton smiled at him and shook his head. But he knew if it was up to him, there wouldn't be any more times. Not after this one. Dan was just too hot to fuck with. Milton couldn't keep the greed out of his eyes as he watched Dan remove the large roll from his pocket. His eyes stayed glued to the money. Just maybe, he reflected, he might be able to squeeze one more cop in after all. Since no one knew about it, his should go as sweet as cotton candy, with no after effects. Dan wasn't in any position to go and tell anybody who was copping for him. And the last thing in the world Milton would do would be to allow even a rumor to get out that he had helped Dan out. How long you gonna be? Dan asked as he held the money out to Milton. Give me about 30 minutes, Dan. It shouldn't take any longer. Okay. Now you remember what I said, Milton. If any kind of cross comes out of this shit, somebody real close to you will answer for it until the day arrives that you can pay for it from your own mistakes. I know how easy it is for you to think that all you have to do is stay out of my way until somebody catches up with me. But you better hide your whole fucking family, man. 'Cause I'll burn this stupid ass house down with them in it. Aw, Dan, that ain't no way for friends to talk now, is it? If you want, you could climb through the window and hide out inside my room until I come back, Milton said seriously. That should show you I'm for real with you, Dan. That don't prove shit to me, Milton. You might leave and plan on calling back while you're gone and tell them to get out. Or you might try setting the motherfucking police. But whichever, I'll kill the stink on shit, boy, if you cross me. You understand? Milton was shaking openly. as he realized that Dan wasn't going to accept his as he realized that Dan wasn't going to accept his invitation to enter, he relaxed. Anything might have happened while he was gone, and then his family would have been under the gun, all because he tried to be for real with a nigger. No, it was much better than the man laid across the street or somewhere, anywhere other than Milton's home. Before Dan could change his mind, Milton began to close the window. He dropped the shade quickly as he suddenly realized the look of indecision flash across the tall, dark man's face. It had suddenly occurred to Dan that he might just be doing the best thing if he stayed in the man's bedroom. There were so many things on his mind that he just couldn't think of everything at once, even though he understood his mistake instantly. As Milton disappeared from the view, Dan began to glance around the yard, trying to take in as many vantage points as he could. The best place, he reasoned, would be across the street. That way, if something funny did come up, he wouldn't be trapped as easily as he would. He wouldn't be trapped as easily as he would be in Milton's backyard. Dan re-entered the alley. Dan re-entered the alley and walked until he found a backyard that he wasn't fenced in. Even though someone lived in the house, the yard was easy to walk through. He had almost reached the house when an elderly woman came out. "Hey there, young man. This ain't no open highway, boy. People live in this house." For a second, Dan thought the woman was going to try and block his path. He didn't have any time to waste because he wanted to be out front whenever Milton came out of the house. First, he wanted to know which way the man went when he drove off. Next, he didn't know what kind of car Milton drove. It was all important knowing which kind of car the man drove away in. His luck was good. As soon as he came out of the old woman's yard, he saw Milton entering an old dark green Ford. He stood with his back against the hedges until the car pulled away from the curb. He was so involved in watching Milton that he ignored the elderly woman. The word police brought him back to his present problem. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he began, hoping to fake her out with kindness. He pointed at his ears. "I ain't able to hear too good, ma'am." "I don't give a shit whether you can hear or not, boy. But if you don't get on about your business and get off my property, I'm going to do like I said and call the motherfucking police on you. Your kind is always sneaking about trying to find something to steal." Goddamn this noisy bitch, Dan cursed inwardly. She could blow the whole thing for him. Miss Lady, he began. "I ain't no thief, no matter what you think." "Hell, lady," he said, and pulled out his roll of money and flashed it at her. "I don't have to steal from nobody, 'cause I got a damn good job working for Mr. Jackson. Yes, ma'am, I works every day, each and every day," he said, putting the money away. From the look of greed that flashed across the old woman's face, he knew she wasn't about to call no police. The woman was too busy wishing she was younger so that she could remove some of that cash from a young fool who didn't know what to do with it. Dan removed a cigarette from his pocket, then pretended as if he couldn't find a match. As he fumbled around dumbly, he saw the look of cunning and disappointment. He saw the look of cunning and disappointment in the woman's face. "I'll give you a match, boy, but I got to go inside the house to get one," the woman stated. Then as she turned to go, Dan put out his bait. Miss, I'll gladly pay you if you will be... Miss, I'd gladly pay you if you would be so kind to bring me a cold drink of water out with you. He smiled broadly. What he wanted most of all was the chance to stay on her porch so that he could watch up and down the street. Maybe, just maybe, he prayed, he might be able to calm her into allowing him to sit there. As soon as she entered the house, Dan walked up on the porch. He sat down quickly on the old brown chair that was there. It was a torn rocking chair, and as Dan began to rock, he wondered idly if the thing would bear up under his slight weight. He didn't have long to wait before she reappeared, carrying a tray with two glasses on it. Since you mentioned pay, I don't want to charge you for no water, so I fixed up some iced tea, she said, then laughed loudly. Dan noticed that she hadn't wasted any time before mentioning money, so he decided the best bet would be to give her something at once. Then he could lead her on about some more if the need should arrive. Taking his time, Dan slowly removed the bankroll he had and quickly slipped $1 off the bottom of it. He honestly hesitated about the amount he gave her. At first, he started to give her $2, but it seemed as if that was too much for such a small thing. He held up the dollar as he pushed the rest of the money back into his pocket. Here, miss, he said as he took a quick swallow of the almost sugarless drink. This sure beats drinking water on a day like this. She took the dollar greedily from his hand, but a look of disappointment flashed across her face. It was quite obvious that she had hoped for more. But for the life of him, Dan couldn't figure out why in the hell she thought she deserved it. Not for the damn near bitter-ass drink she served him. Young man, she began, you'd be surprised at what things cost nowadays. For a woman my age, it's almost impossible to live. Without taking his eyes off the conniving woman's face, he decided to make it hard on her, to see how far she would go. Since she was too old for sex, he wondered idly just which way she would try to con him out of his bread. He could tell from her earlier reactions that she definitely wasn't satisfied with the dollar. But hell, he thought, he couldn't for the life of him see where she was coming from. If he hadn't needed the use of her porch, he'd have quickly told her to kiss his ass, the scheming old bitch. None of these thoughts showed as he stared earnestly into her face. You just wouldn't believe it, she stated again. Just what it takes for an old woman like me to get along on nowadays. I mean, I can make it, but if I should want to drink, now that's something that has to be put off until the first. She caught herself in time, or so she thought. She had been about to mention the first of the month when most elderly people got their old age checks. But through her cunning, she thought that it was best if she didn't mention when her money came. She hesitated briefly, then gave her phony little laugh and continued, Yeah, we have to wait until the first good-hearted person comes along and feels sorry for us and buys us a little something. Her little bird-like eyes darted at him to see if he was getting the message. She continued after briefly giving her brittle laugh. Hee 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 hee. The sound of it was loud as hee 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 hee. The sound of it was loud and shrill. Dan tried not to hear it. He imagined an open tunnel, but no parts of his imagination could cover up the aging teeth that were revealed as her mouth opened wider and wider. The sound seemed to continue forever until for a minute he thought he was about to lose his goddamn mind. After about 10 more minutes, he wondered if he wouldn't have been better off if he had gone onto the alley across the street and found a vacant yard. Here, son, the woman croaked, her shrill voice now raising the hairs on his arm. Have some more. It ain't often that Aunt Jeannie goes and finds her such. It ain't often that Aunt Jenny. It ain't often that Aunt Jenny. It ain't often that Aunt Jeannie goes and finds her such nice young company. Nowadays, young people don't want to be bothered with us old folks. But I could see at once that you was of a different kind. Yes, sirree, right off, I could tell that you was like they used to be. Ain't many of the children raised that away nowadays. No, sirree, you just don't find them like that anymore. Her voice continued to go on and on, while Dan wondered if she would ever stop. He closed his eyes and wished that the voice would stop. How he would like to slam something into it. Boy, son. He opened his eyes and found her leaning over him. Son, you sleeping or something? You sleepy or something? You don't look right. Is something bothering you? God damn right it is. He wanted to scream out at her. This motherfucking Jones is killing me, woman. But the words wouldn't come. At least he didn't allow them to come. He doubted if they would ever shock the old woman. He doubted if they would even shock the old woman anyway. No, he answered quickly. I don't care for any more tea. He had to smile at himself. He hadn't known the goddamn difference. The shit could have been piss for all the shit he knew. For all the shit he knew. Dan glanced up the street wildly, hoping that at any moment he might see Milton returning. He cursed under his breath. No such fucking luck. He let his mind drift, ignoring the pleading old woman beside him. This would have been a wonderful place for him to hide out, he reflected. But after a few days around the old woman, he'd be mad. Other than that, it would have been as if he had disappeared. Now, if I only had about $8 to hold me, Aunt Jeannie began, but was interrupted by the actions of her company. While the woman had been speaking, Dan had closed his eyes again. When he reopened them, the first thing he saw was Milton parking his car. He watched Milton glance up and down the street, looking for Dan in his hiding place. After carefully examining the street, Dan stepped off the porch, catching the woman in mid-sentence. He didn't bother to glance back as he took the first 2 steps on the jump. The old woman stared open-mouthed at the departing figure. You stingy son of a bitch! She yelled at him. Whether or not he heard her, she couldn't tell. Because he never bothered to look back. Before Milton climbed the last steps to his front porch, Dan was at the sidewalk that led up to his front porch. before Milton climbed the last steps to his front porch, Dan was at the sidewalk that led up to his front porch. "Hey, Milton," he called out. "How about you slowing down for a minute?" Milton stopped on the porch. A look of shock flashed across his face. Dan could tell that the man resented him coming out in the open. The very first words Milton spoke proved him right. "God damn, Dan, I thought you'd at least meet me in the rear, not coming running up to me out of the goddamn street." Milton glanced quickly up and down the street. Even though he didn't see anyone, he couldn't relax. "Why don't you cut through the yard, man, and I'll open the back window?" "Fuck that shit," Dan growled as he reached in his pocket and removed his money. He quickly removed a $20 bill and a $5. He quickly removed a $20 bill and a $5. "Where's that fucking package?" The question was more like an order. Milton didn't have too much nerve from the beginning, so he quickly reached down into the front of his pants and removed the bag of dope that he had concealed there from within his jockey shorts. Before handing the dope over, he reached out and got the $25 from Dan. "How are we gonna do this, Dan? I was going into the pad and split the dope. I just wanted a small amount of it anyway," Milton pleaded. He watched Dan concealing the drugs on his person. "What you talking about, man?" Dan asked, all the time being aware of just what Milton wanted. He didn't even bother to wait for an answer, but turned on his heels and started back down the way he had come. Milton came down the steps on the run. "Hey, Dan, what's the deal, man?" he cried as he tagged after Dan, not caring now who saw him. "Hey, man, I gave you some cash, Milton. You can run back and cop you another bag of stuff." "Yeah, I can do that, Dan, but that ain't the way it's supposed to be going down. You said when I got back that we was going to get loaded off of this motherfucker. Not nothing about me going back and recop it with the $25. Shit, Dad, you done promised me the 25 motherfuckers dollars. Shit, Dad, you done promised me the motherfucking $25 just for going and getting down for you." Without bothering to look back at the shorter man who had to run to keep up, Dan lengthened his long stride. The sight of a young black boy on his paper route caused Milton to hesitate, but the thought of losing out on all the dope pushed him on. "Come on, man, let's go back to my crib and break down the drugs like you said from the get." Dan stopped in his tracks. I guess you ain't going to get the message no other way, Milton. But I ain't giving up none of this bread, man. If you ain't happy with what you got, it's too motherfucking bad, brother. 'Cause you ain't about to put none of this jive in your veins. Milton stared at him hotly for a second. "Okay, Dan, if that's the way you're gonna do it, I got to go along with it. But mark my words, nigga, one day you'll want me to cop again, and I'll remind you about this funky shit you pulled off on me today." "You just do that, Dan. You just do that," Dan snapped back at him. "If I should get in the shape I was in earlier today, I need you to remind me about myself, you punk-ass nigga." All Milton could do was stare angrily at the tall man. If he had been able to, Milton would have tried Dan, but he knew he didn't have it trying to fight the bigger man. "Okay, Dan, I deserve what you did. When you laid down with snakes, you should expect to get bit." Dan only laughed as he started walking away. If he could have seen the look on the paperboy's face, he wouldn't have taken it for such a joke. As Milton turned to leave, he saw the young boy push his bike out into the street and start pedaling it slow and start pedaling it slowly. He was going in the same direction as Dad. All right, let me take a pause for the cause just because. Dolo Solo, salute to you. As you can see, Project Eat is real. It's real, y'all. It's real. Whew. Just a second, y'all. I promise to read one more chapter before I'm all done. But yeah, here it goes. Just one drag of this delicious weed. Whew. Happy New Year, y'all. And let me tell you once again, please go and follow the Bounce Pod on your Spotify or on your Amazon Music or on your iTunes. It's there. Follow the podcast, please. I'm over at Apple Music, you know what I'm saying? I'm not on iHeartU or iHeartMedia. I don't think I'm on that yet, but maybe one day. Excellent. That was all I needed. All right. All right. Let's go. We're moving. Pardon the light, y'all. All right. Let's go again. Chapter 11. Fat George moved around the house quickly. For a man his size, it was unnatural. For a man his size, it was unnatural. Sweat ran freely from his brow, but it didn't stop him. If anything, it added speed to his packing. Bags upon bags were now sitting at the door, awaiting the moment when they would be picked up and taken out to the waiting car. God damn it, woman! Fat George cursed. Can't you move your ass any faster? Can't you move your ass any faster? Maria looked out around the doorway from inside the kitchen. I don't know why the hell we have to rush, so, George, if I listen to you, we'll end up leaving half our fucking stuff right here. If you don't hurry the hell up, I'm gonna do just that. Leave all this shit for somebody else. Well, if you do, I'll be that somebody, George, because I done told you I'm not running away and leaving my stuff. Shit! The words seemed to explode from him as he set his last bag down. George leaned against the doorway. The apartment was large and expensive. It was easy to see why Maria had second thoughts about leaving. The furniture was the latest and modern. The couch was deep gold with a matching pair of heavy armchairs. The thick carpets were some of the most expensive that money could buy. The long, heavy drapes that were still hanging from the windows were again done in the rare gold color that Maria had found. She had had the drapes shipped to her all the way from Mexico City. If you want to do something, George, Marie, if you want to do something, George, Maria called out, why don't you start taking down the goddamn drapes? That way, you'll save me a lot of trouble. Drapes, hell, Drapes, hell, George roared from the doorway. I don't seem to be able to get through to you, Maria. We have got to get the fuck out of here. Not this afternoon or later on this evening, but right fucking now. Shit, George, I'm asking you again. What the fuck is the rush? Maybe if I knew why, then I could go along with this shit. But as long as you keep me in the damn dark, it ain't nothing serious about all this hurry. Hurry, shit of yours. George let out a sigh. Let me calm down. George let out a sigh. Maybe it would be better if he let her in on it, he reflected. Then she would be able to understand the importance of it and hurry the fuck up. Oye, Maria, listen to me, okay? He began. Maybe it would have been better if you knew that phone call I got this morning, honey, was a warning. Somebody told these silly-ass Fernandez brothers that I sold some drugs to Don and Curtis. Now you and I know this ain't nothing but bullshit, but they don't. The Fernandez brothers, she drawled. Who the fuck are they but a punk named Pedro and his goddamn brother Emilio? Is that the reason why you're running scared? God damn it, George. Get some backbone. My God, are we supposed to allow two would-be gangsters to run us out of our home? George let out a sigh. You don't fucking understand, woman. It's not just the two brothers, okay? There's a fucking war going on between the Chicanos and the niggas. And if the Chicanos should get the idea that I'm helping the Spades out, God damn it, woman, do I have to spell it out for you? Maria came out of the kitchen. Her hands were on her hips in an attitude of anger. It still ain't going nowhere as bad as you make it out, George. You're Mexican yourself, so am I. Do you think our people will think we are going against them? Hell no. Not for 1 minute. I know them better than that, and you should too. Just any time I go along with that, you say, but the phone call, Maria, the person who took the chance of calling me knew what he was fucking talking about, okay? Right now, can anyone make reason to Pedro since his sister got killed? He won't listen to anybody, okay? So should I stay here and try to reason with a fucking fool? Well, you should do something. You got enough money to hire some people to handle guys like Pedro. So why run? That's just it. I don't want to hire people to handle Pedro. Then everybody will think I'm really on the side of the niggas. No, Maria, that is what I don't want to do. If someone had to hurt Pedro because of it, it wouldn't look so bad. So I'll do the next thing, okay? I'll just get the fuck out of town for you. I'll just get the fuck out of town for a few weeks until things die back down. It shouldn't take that long. That's why I say to you to leave most of this shit, Holmes. It will be here when we get back, okay? Okay, George. But what about the way people are going to talk when they hear that a young punk like Pedro ran you out of town? Coño, mija. It's not Pedro we're running from, Maria. It's those crazy-ass punks who run around behind him. It's those crazy-ass punks who run around with him. Every one of them is out to build up a rep, Maria, and I don't want them to get one off of me. Okay, George, I understand now, but I still think you're going about this all wrong. At least you should have had the fucking sense to hire some kind of protection for us. If it's as dangerous as you say, shit, we need a fucking bodyguard right this moment. If you'd quit running your fucking mouth, Nena, and do like I fucking asked, we won't need anything but your ass helping to lug these motherfucking bags out to the car. Come on, Maria. We can be in Mexico before daybreak. We can be in Mexico before daybreak if we get a good start this evening, right now. As he spoke, George reached over and opened the door. Maria was in the middle of leaning down to pick up two of the bags when she stopped suddenly and froze. Oh my God, she murmured softly. George didn't have to glance around her to know what was happening. It was all like a bad dream. Ever since he first got that Ever since he first got the telephone call, it was as if he was on a stage watching other people act out. It was as if he was on a stage watching other people act out their parts. No matter what he didn't believe he could change what was about to happen. Well, how about this shit, Emilio? Pedro said as he came through the door. Pedro said as he came through the door. Our little nigger lover was about to fly the coop. What's wrong, George? Ain't the Spades got any more money for you to suck out? Or by chance, did you learn that we had heard about your constant dealing with them after you were warned not to fuck with them for a while? Pedro's arrogance was obvious to all watching. All right. That's it for now. Now what I'm going to do is look for the type of videos that I want to see right now. Okay. Come on. Here we are. That's 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So this is part 4. Cry Revenge 4. All right, folks, thank you for sticking around for another edition of Ralph Reads Raw. Now, I'm going to get up off of here. I'm going to stretch my ass off. I'm going to smoke me a blunt. I'm going to go to sleep and start my day tomorrow and get ready for the new year. So with all that being said, fellow sexy people, stay sexy. It becomes you. And I will see you on the next edition of Ralph Reads Raw. Don't forget to tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. Peace, y'all. I'm out of here.